Chapter 4. What the Footprints Told. When Jad-Bal-Jah, the golden lion, was 2 years old, he was as magnificent a specimen of his kind as the Greystokes had ever looked upon. In size he was far above the average of that attained by mature males. In conformation he was superb, his noble head and his great black mane giving him the appearance of a full-grown male, while in intelligence he far outranked his savage brothers of the forest. Jad-Bal-Jah was a never-ending source of pride and delight to the ape-man who had trained him so carefully, and nourished him cunningly for the purpose of developing to the full all the latent powers within him. The lion no longer slept at the foot of his master's bed, but occupied a strong cage that Tarzan had constructed for him at the rear of the bungalow, for who knew better than the ape-man that a lion, wherever he may be or however he may have been raised, is yet a lion a savage flesh-eater. For the first year he had roamed at will about the house and grounds. After that he went abroad only in the company of Tarzan. Often the two roamed the plain and the jungle hunting together. In a way the lion was almost equally as familiar with Jane and Korak, and neither of them feared or mistrusted him, but toward Tarzan of the apes did he show the greatest affection. The blacks of Tarzan's household he tolerated, nor did he ever offer to molest any of the domestic animals or fowl. After Tarzan had impressed upon him in his early cubhood that appropriate punishment followed immediately upon any predatory excursion into the corrals or henhouses. The fact that he was never permitted to become ravenously hungry was doubtless the deciding factor in safeguarding the livestock of the farm. The man and the beast seemed to understand one another perfectly. It is doubtful that the lion understood all that Tarzan said to him, but be that as it may, the ease with which he communicated his wishes to the lion bordered upon the uncanny. The obedience that a combination of sternness and affection had elicited from the cub had become largely habit in the grown lion. At Tarzan's command he would go to great distances and bring back antelope or zebra, laying his kill at his master's feet without offering to taste the flesh himself, and he had even retrieved living animals without harming them. Such, then, was the golden lion that roamed the primeval forest with his godlike master. It was at about this time that there commenced to drift in to the ape-man rumors of a predatory band to the west and south of his estate, ugly stories of ivory raiding, slave running, and torture, such as had not disturbed the quiet of the ape-man's savage jungle since the days of Sheikh Amor ben Khatour, and there came other tales too that caused Tarzan of the apes to pucker his brows in puzzlement and thought. And then a month elapsed during which Tarzan heard no more of the rumors from the west. The war had reduced the resources of the Greystokes to but a meager income. They had given practically all to the cause of the Allies, and now what little had remained to them had been all but exhausted in the rehabilitation of Tarzan's African estate. "It looks very much, Jane," he said to his wife one night, "as though another trip to Opar were on the books." "I dread to think of it. I do not want you to go," she said. "You have come away from that awful city twice, but barely with your life. The third time you may not be so fortunate. We have enough, John, to permit us to live here in comfort and in happiness. Why jeopardize those two things which are greater than all wealth in another attempt to raid the treasure vaults?" "There is no danger, Jane," he assured her. "The last time Werper dogged my footsteps, and between him and the earthquake I was nearly done for. But there is no chance of any such combination of circumstances thwarting me again." "You will not go alone, John?" she asked. "You will take Korak with you?" "No," he said, "I shall not take him. He must remain here with you, for really my long absences are more dangerous to you than to me. I shall take 50 of the Waziri as porters to carry the gold, and thus we should be able to bring out enough to last us for a long time." "And Jad-Bal-Jah," she asked, "shall you take him?" "No, he had better remain here. Korak can look after him and take him out for a hunt occasionally. I am going to travel light and fast, and it would be too hard a trip for him. Lions don't care to move around much in the hot sun. And as we shall travel mostly by day, I doubt if Jad-Bal-Jah would last long." And so it befell that Tarzan of the apes set out once more upon the long trail that leads to Opar. Behind him marched 50 giant Waziri, the pick of the warlike tribe that had adopted Tarzan as its chief. Upon the veranda of the bungalow stood Jane and Korak waving their adieu, while from the rear of the building there came to the ape-man's ears the rumbling roar of Jad-Bal-Jah, the golden lion. And as they marched away, the voice of Numa accompanied them out upon the rolling plain, until at last it trailed off to nothingness in the distance. His speed determined by that of the slowest of the blacks, Tarzan made but comparatively rapid progress. Opar lay a good 25 days' trek from the farm for men traveling light, as were these, but upon the return journey, laden as they would be with the ingots of gold, their progress would be slower. And because of this, the ape-man had allotted 2 months for the venture. His safari, consisting of seasoned warriors only, permitted of really rapid progress. They carried no supplies, for they were all hunters and were moving through a country in which game was abundant, no need then for burdening themselves with the cumbersome impedimenta of white huntsmen. A thorn boma and a few leaves furnished their shelter for the night, while spears and arrows and the powers of their great white chief ensured that their bellies would never go empty. With the picked men that he had brought with him, Tarzan expected to make the trip to Opar in 21 days, though had he been traveling alone he would have moved 2 or 3 times as fast since, when Tarzan elected to travel with speed, he fairly flew through the jungle, equally at home in it by day or by night and practically tireless. It was a mid-afternoon, the 3rd week of the march, that Tarzan, ranging far ahead of his blacks in search of game, came suddenly upon the carcass of Bara, the deer, a feathered arrow protruding from its flank. It was evident that Bara had been wounded at some little distance from where it had lain down to die, for the location of the missile indicated that the wound could not have caused immediate death. But what particularly caught the attention of the ape-man, even before he had come close enough to make a minute examination, was the design of the arrow, and immediately he withdrew it from the body of the deer. He knew it for what it was, and was filled with such wonderment as might come to you or to me were we to see a native Swazi headdress upon Broadway or the Strand. For the arrow was precisely such as one may purchase in most any sporting goods house in any large city of the world, such an arrow as is sold and used for archery practice in the parks and suburbs. Nothing could have been more incongruous than this silly toy in the heart of savage Africa, and yet that it had done its work effectively was evident by the dead body of Bara, though the ape-man guessed that the shaft had been sped by no practiced, savage hand. Tarzan's curiosity was aroused, and also his inherent jungle caution. One must know his jungle well to survive long the jungle, and if one would know it well he must let no unusual occurrence or circumstance go unexplained. And so it was that Tarzan set out upon the backtrack of Bara for the purpose of ascertaining, if possible, the nature of Bara's slayer. The bloody spoor was easily followed, and the ape-man wondered why it was that the hunter had not tracked and overtaken his quarry, which had evidently been dead since the previous day. He found that Bara had traveled far, and the sun was already low in the west before Tarzan came upon the first indications of the slayer of the animal. These were in the nature of footprints that filled him with quite as much surprise as had the arrow. He examined them carefully, and stooping low, even sniffed at them with his sensitive nostrils. Improbable, nay impossible though it seemed, the naked footprints were those of a white man, a large man, probably as large as Tarzan himself. As the foster son of Kala stood gazing upon the spoor of the mysterious stranger, he ran the fingers of one hand through his thick black hair in a characteristic gesture indicative of deep puzzlement. What naked white man could there be in Tarzan's jungle who slew Tarzan's game with the pretty arrow of an archery club? It was incredible that there should be such a one, and yet there recurred to the ape-man's mind the vague rumors that he had heard weeks before. Determined to solve the mystery, he set out now upon the trail of the stranger, an erratic trail which wound about through the jungle, apparently aimlessly, prompted, Tarzan guessed, by the ignorance of an inexperienced hunter. But night fell before he had arrived at a solution of the riddle, and it was pitch dark as the ape-man turned his steps toward camp. He knew that his Waziri would be expecting meat, and it was not Tarzan's intention to disappoint them, though he then discovered that he was not the only carnivore hunting the district that night. The coughing grunt of a lion close by apprised him of it first, and then from the distance the deep roar of another. But of what moment was it to the ape-man that others hunted? It would not be the first time that he had pitted his cunning, his strength, and his agility against the other hunters of his savage world, both man and beast. And so it was that Tarzan made his kill at last, snatching it almost from under the nose of a disappointed and infuriated lion, a fat antelope that the latter had marked as his own. Throwing his kill to his shoulder almost in the path of the charging Numa, the ape-man swung lightly to the lower terraces, and with a taunting laugh for the infuriated cat, vanished noiselessly into the night. He found the camp and his hungry Waziri without trouble, and so great was their faith in him that they not for a moment doubted but that he would return with meat for them. Early the following morning Tarzan set out again toward Opar, and directing his Waziri to continue the march in the most direct way, he left them that he might pursue further his investigations of the mysterious presence in his jungle that the arrow and the footsteps had apprised him of. Coming again to the spot at which darkness had forced him to abandon his investigations, he took up the spoor of the stranger. Nor had he followed it far before he came upon further evidence of the presence of this new and malign personality. Stretched before him in the trail was the body of a giant ape, one of the tribe of great anthropoids among whom Tarzan had been raised. Protruding from the hairy abdomen of the Mangani was another of the machine-made arrows of civilization. The ape-man's eyes narrowed and a scowl darkened his brow. Who was this who dared invade his sacred preserves and slaughter thus ruthlessly Tarzan's people? A low growl rumbled in the throat of the ape-man. Sloughed with the habiliments of civilization was the thin veneer of civilization that Tarzan wore among white men. No English lord was this who looked upon the corpse of his hairy cousin, but another jungle beast in whose breast raged the unquenchable fire of suspicion and hatred for the man-thing that is the heritage of the jungle bred. A beast of prey viewed the bloody work of ruthless man, nor was there in the consciousness of Tarzan any acknowledgement of his blood relationship to the killer. Realizing that the trail had been made upon the second day before, Tarzan hastened on in pursuit of the slayer. There was no doubt in his mind but that plain murder had been committed, for he was sufficiently familiar with the traits of the Mangani to know that none of them would provoke assault unless driven to it. Tarzan was traveling upwind, and some half-hour after he had discovered the body of the ape, his keen nostrils caught the scent spoor of others of its kind. Knowing the timidity of these fierce denizens of the jungle, he moved forward now with great wariness, lest, warned of his approach, they take flight before they were aware of his identity. He did not see them often, yet he knew that there were always those among them who recalled him, and that through these he could always establish amicable relations with the balance of the tribe. Owing to the denseness of the undergrowth, Tarzan chose the middle terraces for his advance, and here, swinging freely and swiftly among the leafy boughs, he came presently upon the giant anthropoids. There were about 20 of them in the band, and they were engaged in a little natural clearing, in their never-ending search for caterpillars and beetles, which formed important items in the diet of the Mangani. A faint smile overspread the ape-man's face as he paused upon a great branch, himself hidden by the leafy foliage about him, and watched the little band below him. Every action, every movement of the great apes, recalled vividly to Tarzan's mind the long years of his childhood, when, protected by the fierce mother-love of Kala, the she-ape, he had ranged the jungle with the tribe of Kerchak. In the romping young he saw again Nita and his other childhood playmates, and in the adults all the great, savage brutes he had feared in youth and conquered in manhood. The ways of man may change, but the ways of the ape are the same, yesterday, today, and forever. He watched them in silence for some minutes. How glad they would be to see him when they discovered his identity. For Tarzan of the Apes was known the length and the breadth of the great jungle as the friend and protector of the Mangani. At first they would growl at him and threaten him, for they would not depend solely on either their eyes or their ears for confirmation of his identity. Not until he had entered the clearing, and bristling bulls with bared fighting fangs had circled him stiffly until they had come close enough for their nostrils to verify the evidence of their eyes and ears, would they finally accept him. Then doubtless there would be great excitement for a few minutes, until, following the instincts of the ape mind, their attention was weaned from him by a blowing leaf, a caterpillar, or a bird's egg, and then they would move about their business, taking no further notice of him more than of any other member of the tribe. But this would not come until after each individual had smelled of him, and perhaps pawed his flesh with calloused hands. Now it was that Tarzan made a friendly sound of greeting, and as the apes looked up, stepped from his concealment into plain view of them. "I am Tarzan of the Apes," he said, "mighty fighter, friend of the Mangani. Tarzan comes in friendship to his people." And with these words he dropped lightly to the lush grass of the clearing. Instantly pandemonium reigned. Screaming warnings, the shears raced with the young for the opposite side of the clearing, while the bulls, bristling and growling, faced the intruder. "Come," cried Tarzan, "do you not know me? I am Tarzan of the Apes, friend of the Mangani, son of Kala, and king of the tribe of Kerchak." "We know you," growled one of the old bulls. "Yesterday we saw you when you killed Gobu. Go away or we shall kill you." "I did not kill Gobu," replied the ape-man. "I found his dead body yesterday and I was following the spoor of his slayer when I came upon you." "We saw you," repeated the old bull. "Go away or we shall kill you. You are no longer the friend of the Mangani." The ape-man stood with brows contracted in thought. It was evident that these apes really believed that they had seen him kill their fellow. What was the explanation? How could it be accounted for? Did the naked footprints of the great white man whom he had been following mean more, then, than he had guessed? Tarzan wondered, He raised his eyes and again addressed the bulls. "It was not I who killed Gobu," he insisted. "Many of you have known me all your lives. You know that only in fair fight, as one bull fights another, have I ever killed a Mangani. You know that of all the jungle people, the Mangani are my best friends, and that Tarzan of the apes is the best friend the Mangani have. How, then, could I slay one of my own people?" "We only know," replied the old bull, "that we saw you kill Gobu. With our own eyes we saw you kill him. Go away quickly, therefore, or we shall kill you. Mighty fighter is Tarzan of the apes, but mightier even than he are all the great bulls of Pagth. I am Pagth, king of the tribe of Pagth. Go away before we kill you." Tarzan tried to reason with them, but they would not listen, so confident were they that it was he who had slain their fellow the bull Gobu. Finally, rather than chance a quarrel in which some of them must inevitably be killed, he turned sorrowfully away. But more than ever now was he determined to seek out the slayer of Gobu, that he might demand an accounting of one who dared thus invade his lifelong domain. Tarzan trailed the spoor until it mingled with the tracks of many men, barefooted blacks mostly, but among them the footprints of booted white men, and once he saw the footprints of a woman or a child, which he could not tell. The trail led apparently toward the rocky hills which protected the barren valley of Opar. Forgetful now of his original mission and imbued only with a savage desire to wrest from the interlopers a full accounting for their presence in the jungle and to mete out to the slayer of Gobu his just deserts, Tarzan forged ahead upon the now broad and well-marked trail of the considerable party, which could not now be much more than a half-day's march ahead of him, which meant that they were doubtless now already upon the rim of the valley of Opar, if this was their ultimate destination. And what other they could have in view Tarzan could not imagine. He had always kept closely to himself the location of Opar, insofar as he knew no white person other than Jane and their son Korak knew of the location of the forgotten city of the ancient Atlanteans. Yet what else could have drawn these white men with so large a party into the savage, unexplored wilderness which hemmed Opar upon all sides? Such were the thoughts that occupied Tarzan's mind as he followed swiftly the trail that led toward Opar. Darkness fell, but so fresh was the spoor that the ape-man could follow it by scent, even when he could not see the imprints upon the ground, and presently, in the distance, he saw the light of a camp ahead of him. Before him was the body of a giant anthropoid. Chapter 5. The Fatal Drops. At home, the life in the bungalow and at the farm followed its usual routine, as it had before the departure of Tarzan. Korak, sometimes on foot and sometimes on horseback, followed the activities of the farm hands and the herders, sometimes alone but more often in company with the white foreman Jervis, and often, especially when they rode, Jane accompanied them. The golden lion Korak exercised upon a leash, since he was not at all confident of his powers of control over the beast, and feared lest, in the absence of his master, Jad Balja might take to the forest and revert to his natural savage state. Such a lion abroad in the jungle would be a distinct menace to human life, for Jad Balja, reared among men, lacked that natural timidity of men that is so marked a trait of all wild beasts. Trained as he had been to make his kill at the throat of a human effigy, it required no considerable powers of imagination upon the part of Korak to visualize what might occur should the golden lion, loosed from all restraint, be thrown upon his own resources in the surrounding jungle. It was during the first week of Tarzan's absence that a runner from Nairobi brought a cable message to Lady Greystoke, announcing the serious illness of her father in London. Mother and son discussed the situation. It would be 5 or 6 weeks before Tarzan could return, even if they sent a runner after him, and were Jane to await him, there would be little likelihood of her reaching her father in time. Even should she depart at once, there seemed only a faint hope that she would arrive early enough to see him alive. It was decided, therefore, that she should set out immediately, Korak accompanying her as far as Nairobi, and then returning to the ranch and resuming its general supervision until his father's return. It is a long trek from the Greystoke estate to Nairobi, and Korak had not yet returned when, about 3 weeks after Tarzan's departure, a black, whose duty it was to feed and care for Jad Balja, carelessly left the door of the cage unfastened while he was cleaning it. The golden lion paced back and forth while the black wielded his broom within the cage. They were old friends, and the Waziri felt no fear of the great lion, with the result that his back was as often turned to him as not. The black was working in the far corner of the cage when Jad Balja paused a moment at the door at the opposite end. The beast saw that the gate hung slightly ajar upon its hinges. Silently he raised a great padded paw and inserted it in the opening. A slight pull, and the gate swung in. Instantly the golden lion inserted his snout in the widened aperture, and as he swung the barrier aside, the horrified black looked up to see his charge drop softly to the ground outside. "Stop, Jad Balja! Stop!" screamed the frightened black, leaping after him, but the golden lion only increased his pace, and leaping the fence, loped off in the direction of the forest. The black pursued him with brandishing broom, emitting loud yells that brought the inmates of the Waziri huts into the open, where they joined their fellow in pursuit of the lion. Across the rolling plains they followed him, but as well have sought to snare the elusive Willow, the wisp as this swift and wary fugitive, who heeded neither their blandishments nor their threats. And so it was that they saw the golden lion disappear into the primeval forest, and though they searched diligently until almost dark, they were forced at length to give up their quest and return crestfallen to the farm. "Ah," cried the unhappy black, who had been responsible for the escape of Jad Balja, "what will the big Bwana say to me? What will he do to me when he finds that I have permitted the golden lion to get away?" "You will be banished from the bungalow for a long time," Kiwazi old Muviro assured him. "And doubtless you will be sent to the grazing ground far to the east to guard the herd there, where you will have plenty of lions for company, though they will not be as friendly as was Jad Balja. It is not half what you deserve." And were the heart of the big Bwana not filled with love for his black children, were he like other white Bwanas old Muviro has seen, you would be lashed until you could not stand, perhaps until you died. "I am a man," replied Kiwazi. "I am a warrior and a Waziri. Whatever punishment the big Bwana inflicts I will accept as a man should." It was that same night that Tarzan approached the campfires of the strange party he had been tracking. Unseen by them, he halted in the foliage of a tree directly in the center of their camp, which was surrounded by an enormous thorn boma, and brilliantly lighted by numerous fires which blacks were diligently feeding with branches from an enormous pile of firewood that they had evidently gathered earlier in the day for this purpose. Near the center of the camp were several tents, and before one, in the light of a fire, sat 4 white men. 2 of them were great, bull-necked, red-faced fellows, apparently Englishmen of the lower class. The third appeared to be a short, fat German Jew, while the fourth was a tall, slender, handsome fellow with dark, wavy brown hair and regular features. He and the German were most meticulously garbed for Central African traveling, after the highly idealized standard of motion pictures. In fact, either one of them might have stepped directly from a screening of the latest jungle thriller. The young man was evidently not of English descent, and Tarzan mentally catalogued him almost immediately as a Slav. Shortly after Tarzan's arrival, this one arose and entered one of the nearby tents, from which Tarzan immediately heard the sound of voices in low conversation. He could not distinguish the words, but the tones of one seemed quite distinctly feminine. The 3 remaining at the fire were carrying on a desultory conversation, when suddenly from near at hand beyond the boma wall, a lion's roar broke the silence of the jungle. With a startled shriek, the Jew leaped to his feet so suddenly that he cleared the ground a good foot, and then, stepping backward, he lost his balance, tripped over his camp stool, and sprawled upon his back. "My God," Adolphe roared one of his companions, "if you do that again, damn me if I don't break your neck. Ere we are, and that's that." "Blime if he ain't worse en a bloomin' lion," growled the other. The Jew crawled to his feet. "Mein Gott," he cried, his voice quavering. "I ought sure he v's coming over the fence. SLP if I ever get out of dis. Never again, not for all the gold in Africa would I go too rough, vad I have been too rough these past 2 months. Oi, oi, when I think of it, oi, 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 lions, and leopards, and rhinoceroses and hippopotamuses, oi, oi." His companions laughed. "Dick and I tells you right along from the beginning that you hadn't oughter come into the interior," said one of them. "But for why I buy all these clothes," wailed the German. "Mein Gott, this suit, it stands me 20 guineas, what I stand in. Ach, had I know something, 1 guinea would have bought me my whole wardrobe 20 guineas for this no one to see it but niggers and lions." "And you look like L in it, besides," commented one of his friends. "And look at it, it's all dirty and torn. How should I know it? I spoiled this suit. Mighty mine own eyes I see it at der Princess Theater, how der hero spent 3 months in Africa hunting lions and killing cannibals. And when he comes away, he hasn't even got a grease spot on his pants. How should I know it? Africa was so dirty and full of thorns." It was at this point that Tarzan of the Apes elected to drop quietly into the circle of firelight before them. The 2 Englishmen leapt to their feet, quite evidently startled, and the Jew turned and took a half-step as though in flight, but immediately his eyes rested upon the ape-man. He halted, a look of relief supplanting that of terror which had overspread his countenance, as Tarzan had dropped upon them apparently from the heavens. "Mein Gott," Esteban shrilled the German, "why you come back so soon, and for why you come back like dot sudden, don't you suppose we got nerves?" Tarzan was angry at these raw intruders, who dared enter without his permission the wide domain in which he kept peace and order. When Tarzan was angry, there flamed upon his forehead the scar that Bolgani the gorilla had placed there upon that long-gone day when the boy Tarzan had met the great beast in mortal combat, and first learned the true value of his father's hunting knife, the knife that had placed him, the comparatively weak little Tarmangani, upon an even footing with the great beasts of the jungle. His grey eyes were narrowed, his voice came cold and level as he addressed them. "Who are you," he demanded, "who dare thus invade the country of the Waziri, the land of Tarzan, without permission from the Lord of the Jungle?" "Where do you get that stuff?" Esteban demanded one of the Englishmen. "And what in hell are you doing back here alone and so soon? Where are your porters? Where is the bloomin' gold?" The ape-man eyed the speaker in silence for a moment. "I am Tarzan of the Apes," he said. "I do not know what you are talking about. I only know that I come in search of him who slew Gobu, the great ape, him who slew Bara, the deer, without my permission." "Oh, exploded the other Englishman. "Stow the guff. Esteban, if you're trying for to be funny, we don't see the joke. Ere we are, and that's that." Inside the tent, which the fourth white man had entered while Tarzan was watching the camp from his hiding place in the tree above, a woman, evidently suddenly stirred by terror, touched the arm of her companion frantically and pointed toward the tall, almost naked figure of the ape-man as he stood revealed in the full light of the beast fires. "God, Carl," she whispered, in trembling tones, "look." "What's wrong?" Flora inquired her companion. "I see only Esteban." "It is not Esteban," hissed the girl. "It is Lord Greystoke himself. It is Tarzan of the Apes." "You are mad," Flora replied the man. "It cannot be he." "It is he," though she insisted. "Do you suppose that I do not know him? Did I not work in his townhouse for years? Did I not see him nearly every day? Do you suppose that I do not know Tarzan of the Apes? Look at that red scar flaming on his forehead. I have heard the story of that scar, and I have seen it burn scarlet when he was aroused to anger. It is scarlet now, and Tarzan of the Apes is angry." "Well, suppose it is Tarzan of the Apes, what can he do?" "You do not know him," replied the girl. "You do not guess the tremendous power he wields here, the power of life and death over man and beast. If he knew our mission here, not one of us would ever reach the coast alive. The very fact that he is here now makes me believe that he may have discovered our purpose, and if he has, God help us, unless. "Unless what?" demanded the man. The girl was silent in thought for a moment. "There is only one way," she said finally. "We dare not kill him. His savage blacks would learn of it, and no power on earth could save us then. There is a way, though, if we act quickly." She turned and searched for a moment in one of her bags, and presently she handed the man a small bottle containing liquid. "Go out and talk to him," she said. "Make friends with him. Lie to him. Tell him anything. Promise anything. But get on friendly enough terms with him so that you can offer him coffee. He does not drink wine or anything with alcohol in it. But I know that he likes coffee. I have often served it to him in his room late at night upon his return from the theatre or a ball. Get him to drink coffee, and then you will know what to do with this." And she indicated the bottle which the man still held in his hand. Krasky nodded. "I understand," he said, and turning left the tent. He had taken but a step when the girl recalled him. "Do not let him see me. Do not let him guess that I am here or that you know me." The man nodded and left her. Approaching the tense figures before the fire, he greeted Tarzan with a pleasant smile and a cheery word. "Welcome," he said. "We are always glad to see a stranger in our camp. Sit down. Hand the gentleman a stool." "John," he said to Peebles. The ape-man eyed Krasky as he had eyed the others. There was no answering friendly light in his eyes responding to the Russian's greeting. "I have been trying to find out what your party is doing here," he said sharply to the Russian, "but they still insist that I am someone whom I am not. They are either fools or knaves, and I intend to find out which, and deal with them accordingly." Come," cried Krasky soothingly. "There must be some mistake, I am sure. But tell me, who are you?" "I am Tarzan of the Apes," replied the ape-man. No hunters enter this part of Africa without my permission. That fact is so well known that there is no chance of your having passed the coast without having been so advised. I seek an explanation, and that quickly." "Ah, you are Tarzan of the apes," exclaimed Krasky. "Fortunate indeed are we, for now may we be set straight upon our way, and escape from our frightful dilemma is assured. We are lost, sir, inextricably lost, due to the ignorance or knavery of our guide, who deserted us several weeks ago. Surely we knew of you. Who does not know of Tarzan of the apes? But it was not our intention to cross the boundaries of your territory. We were searching farther south for specimens of the fauna of the district, which our good friend and employer, here Mr. Adolphe Bluber, is collecting at great expense for presentation to a museum in his home city in America. Now, I am sure that you can tell us where we are and direct us upon our proper course." Peebles, Throck, and Bluber stood fascinated by Krasky's glib lies, but it was the German Jew who first rose to the occasion. Too thick were the skulls of the English pugs to grasp quickly the clever ruse of the Russian. "Va, yes," said the oily Bluber, rubbing his palms together. "Iss just what I was going to tell you." Tarzan turned sharply upon him. "Then what was all this talk about Esteban?" he asked. "Was it not by that name that these others addressed me?" "Ah," cried Bluber, "John will have his little joke. He is ignorant of Africa, he has never been here before. He tio perhaps that you veer a native. John he calls all the natives Esteban, and he has great jokes by himself meti dem, because he knows they cannot understand what he says. Hey John." "I is it not so, voted I say," but the shrewd Bluber did not wait for John to reply. "You see," he went on, "we are lost. And you take us oid mighty's jungle, we pay you anything. You name your own price." The ape-man only half believed him, yet he was somewhat mollified by their evidently friendly intentions. Perhaps after all they were telling him a half-truth, and had really wandered into his territory unwittingly. That, however, he would find out definitely from their native carriers, from whom his own waziri would wean the truth. But the matter of his having been mistaken for Esteban still piqued his curiosity. Also, he was still desirous of learning the identity of the slayer of Gobu, the great ape. "Please sit down," urged Krasky. "We were about to have coffee, and we should be delighted to have you join us. We meant no wrong in coming here, and I can assure you that we will gladly and willingly make full amends to you, or to whomever else we may have unintentionally wronged." To take coffee with these men would do no harm. Perhaps he had wronged them, but however that might be, a cup of their coffee would place no great obligation upon him. Flora had been right in her assertion that if Tarzan of the apes had any weakness whatsoever, it was for an occasional cup of black coffee late at night. He did not accept the proffered camp stool, but squatted ape fashion before them, the flickering light of the beast fires playing upon his bronzed hide and bringing into relief the gracefully contoured muscles of his godlike frame. Not as the muscles of the blacksmith or the professional strongman were the muscles of Tarzan of the apes, but rather those of Mercury or Apollo, so symmetrically balanced were their proportions, suggesting only the great strength that lay in them. Trained to speed and agility were they as well as to strength, and thus clothing as they did his giant frame, they imparted to him the appearance of a demigod. Throck, Peebles, and Bluber sat watching him in spellbound fascination, while Krasky walked over to the cook fire to arrange for the coffee. The two Englishmen were as yet only half awakened to the fact that they had mistaken this newcomer for another, and as it was, Peebles still scratched his head and grumbled to himself in inarticulate half-denial of Krasky's assumption of the new identity of Tarzan. Bluber was inwardly terror-stricken. His keener intelligence had quickly grasped the truth of Krasky's recognition of the man for what he was rather than for what Peebles and Throck thought him to be, and as Bluber knew nothing of Flora's plan. He was in quite a state of funk as he tried to visualize the outcome of Tarzan's discovery of them at the very threshold of Opar. He did not realize, as did Flora, that their very lives were in danger, that it was Tarzan of the apes, a beast of the jungle, with whom they had to deal, and not John Clayton, Lord Greystoke, an English peer. Rather was Bluber considering the £2,000 that they stood to lose through this deplorable termination of their expedition. For he was sufficiently familiar with the reputation of the ape-man to know that they would never be permitted to take with them the gold that Esteban was very likely, at this moment, pilfering from the vaults of Opar. Really, Bluber was almost upon the verge of tears when Krasky returned with the coffee, which he brought himself. From the dark shadows of the tent's interior, Flora Hawkes looked nervously out upon the scene before her. She was terrified at the possibility of discovery by her former employer, for she had been a maid in the Greystoke's London townhouse as well as at the African bungalow and knew that Lord Greystoke would recognize her instantly should he chance to see her. She entertained for him, now in his jungle haunts, a fear that was possibly greater than Tarzan's true character warranted. But none the less real was it to the girl whose guilty conscience conjured all sorts of possible punishments for her disloyalty to those who had always treated her with uniform kindliness and consideration. Constant dreaming of the fabulous wealth of the treasure vaults of Opar, concerning which she had heard so much in detail from the conversations of the Greystokes, had aroused within her naturally crafty and unscrupulous-minded desire for possession. And in consequence thereof she had slowly visualized a scheme whereby she might loot the treasure vaults of a sufficient number of the golden ingots to make her independently wealthy for life. The entire plan had been hers. She had at first interested Krasky, who had in turn enlisted the cooperation of the two Englishmen and Bluba, and these four had raised the necessary money to defray the cost of the expedition. It had been Flora who had searched for a type of man who might successfully impersonate Tarzan in his own jungle, and she had found Esteban Miranda, a handsome, powerful, and unscrupulous Spaniard, whose histrionic ability aided by the art of makeup, of which he was a past master, permitted him to almost faultlessly impersonate the character they desired him to portray in so far as least as outward appearances were concerned. The Spaniard was not only powerful and active, but physically courageous as well, and since he had shaved his beard and donned the jungle habiliments of a Tarzan, he had lost no opportunity for emulating the ape-man in every way that lay within his ability. Of jungle craft he had none, of course, and personal combats with the more savage jungle beasts caution prompted him to eschew, but he hunted the lesser game with spear and with arrow and practiced continually with the grass rope that was a part of his make-up. And now Flora Hawkes saw all her well-laid plans upon the verge of destruction. She trembled as she watched the men before the fire, for her fear of Tarzan was very real, and then she became tense with nervous anticipation as she saw Krasky approaching the group with the coffee pot in one hand and cups in the other. Krasky set the pot and the cups upon the ground a little in the rear of Tarzan, and as he filled the latter she saw him pour a portion of the contents of the bottle she had given him into one of the cups. A cold sweat broke out upon her forehead as Krasky lifted this cup and offered it to the ape-man. Would he take it? Would he suspect? If he did suspect, what horrible punishment would be meted to them all for their temerity? She saw Krasky hand another cup to Peebles, Throck, and Bluba, then returned to the circle with the last one for himself. As the Russian raised it before his face and bowed politely to the ape-man, she saw the five men drink. The reaction which ensued left her weak and spent. Turning, she collapsed upon her cot and lay there trembling, her face buried in her arm. And outside, Tarzan of the Apes drained his cup to the last drop. Chapter 6. Death Steals Behind. During the afternoon of the day that Tarzan discovered the camp of the conspirators, a watcher upon the crumbling outer wall of the ruined city of Opar descried a party of men moving downward into the valley from the summit of the encircling cliff. Tarzan, Jane Clayton, and their black Waziri were the only strangers that the denizens of Opar had ever seen within their valley during the lifetime of the oldest among them. And only in half-forgotten legends of a bygone past was there any suggestion that strangers other than these had ever visited Opar. Yet from time immemorial a guard had always remained upon the summit of the outer wall. Now a single knurled and crippled man-like creature was all that recalled the numerous, lithe warriors of lost Atlantis. For down through the long ages the race had deteriorated, and finally through occasional mating with the great apes the men had become the beast-like things of modern Opar. Strange and inexplicable had been the providence of nature that had confined this deterioration almost solely to the males, leaving the females straight, well-formed, often of comely and even beautiful features. A condition that might be largely attributable to the fact that female infants possessing ape-like characteristics were immediately destroyed, while on the other hand, boy babies who possessed purely human attributes were also done away with. Typical indeed of the male inhabitants of Opar was the lone watcher upon the outer city wall, a short, stocky man with matted hair and beard, his tangled locks growing low upon a low, receding forehead. Small, close-set eyes and fang-like teeth bore evidence of his simian ancestry, as did his short, crooked legs and long, muscular ape-like arms, all scantily hair-covered as was his torso. As his wicked, blood-rimmed eyes watched the progress of the party across the valley toward Opar, evidences of his growing excitement were manifested in the increased rapidity of his breathing, and low, almost inaudible growls that issued from his throat. The strangers were too far distant to be recognizable only as human beings, and their number to be roughly approximated as between 2 and 3 score. Having assured himself of these two facts, the watcher descended from the outer wall, crossed the space between it and the inner wall, through which he passed, and at a rapid trot crossed the broad avenue beyond and disappeared within the crumbling but still magnificent temple beyond. Kajay, the high priest of Opar, squatted beneath the shade of the giant trees which now overgrew what had once been one of the gardens of the ancient temple. With him were a dozen members of the lesser priesthood, the intimate cronies of the high priest, who were startled by the sudden advent of one of the inferior members of the clan of Opar. The fellow hurried breathlessly to Kajay. "Kajay," he cried, "strange men descend upon Opar. From the northwest they have come into the valley from beyond the barrier cliffs, 50 of them at least, perhaps half again that number. I saw them as I watched from the summit of the outer wall, but further than they are men I cannot say. For they are still a great distance away. Not since the great Tarmangani came among us last have there been strangers within Opar. It has been many moons since the great Tarmangani, who called himself Tarzan of the Apes, was among us," said Kajay. "He promised us to return before the rain to see that no harm had befallen La, but he did not come back, and La has always insisted that he is dead. Have you told any other of what you have seen?" he demanded, turning suddenly upon the messenger. "No," replied the latter. "Good," exclaimed Kajay. "Come, we will all go to the outer wall and see who it is who dares enter forbidden Opar, and let no one breathe a word of what Black has told us until I give permission." "The word of Kajay is law until La speaks," murmured one of the priests. Kajay turned a scowling face upon the speaker. "I am high priest of Opar," he growled. "Who dares disobey me?" "But Louisiana is high priestess," said one, "and the high priestess is the queen of Opar." "But the high priest can offer whom he will as sacrifice in the chamber of the dead or to the flaming god," Kajay reminded the other meaningly. "We shall keep silence," Kajay replied the priest, cringing. "Good," growled the high priest, and led the way from the garden through the corridors of the temple back toward the outer wall of Opar. From here they watched the approaching party that was in plain view of them, far out across the valley. The watchers conversed in low gutturals in the language of the great apes, interspersed with which were occasional words and phrases of a strange tongue that were doubtless corrupted forms of the ancient language of Atlantis handed down through countless generations from their human progenitors, that now extinct race whose cities and civilization lie buried deep beneath. The tossing waves of the Atlantic, and whose adventurous spirit had, in remote ages, caused them to penetrate into the heart of Africa in search of gold and to build there, in duplication of their far home cities, the magnificent city of Opar. As Kajay and his followers watched from beneath shaggy brows the strangers plodding laboriously beneath the now declining equatorial sun across the rocky, barren valley, a grey little monkey eyed them from amidst the foliage of one of the giant trees that had forced its way through the pavement of the ancient avenue behind them. A solemn, sad-faced little monkey it was, but like all his kind overcome by curiosity, and finally to such an extent that his fear of the fierce males of Opar was so considerably overcome that he at last swung lightly from the tree to the pavement, made his way through the inner wall and up the inside of the outer wall to a position in their rear where he could hide behind one of the massive granite blocks of the crumbling wall in comparative safety from detection, the while he might overhear the conversation of the Oparians, all of which that was carried on in the language of the great apes he could understand perfectly. The afternoon was drawing to a close before the slowly moving company approaching Opar was close enough for individuals to be recognizable in any way, and then presently one of the younger priests exclaimed excitedly, "It is he, Kajay. It is the great Tarmangani who calls himself Tarzan of the Apes. I can see him plainly. The others are all black men. He is urging them on, prodding them with his spear. They act as though they were afraid and very tired, but he is forcing them forward." "You are sure," demanded Kajay, "you are sure that it is Tarzan of the Apes?" "I am positive," replied the speaker, and then another of the priests joined his assurances to that of his fellow. At last they were close enough so that Kajay himself, whose eyesight was not as good as that of the younger members of the company, realized that it was indeed Tarzan of the Apes who was returning to Opar. The high priest scowled angrily and thought. Suddenly he turned upon the others. "He must not come," he cried. "He must not enter Opar. Hasten and fetch 100 fighting men. We will meet them as they come through the outer wall and slay them one by one." "But Louisiana," cried he who had aroused Kajay's anger in the garden, I distinctly recall that La offered the friendship of Opar to Tarzan of the Apes upon that time, many moons ago, that he saved her from the tusks of infuriated Tantor. Silence, growled Kadje. He shall not enter, we shall slay them all, though we need not know their identity until it is too late. Do you understand? And know too that whosoever attempts to thwart my purpose shall die, and he die not as a sacrifice. He shall die at my hands, but die he shall. You hear me? And he pointed an unclean finger at the trembling priest. Manu the monkey, hearing all this, was almost bursting with excitement. He knew Tarzan of the Apes as all the migratory monkeys the length and breadth of Africa knew him. He knew him for a friend and protector. To Manu, the males of Opar were neither beast, nor man, nor friend. He knew them as cruel and surly creatures who ate the flesh of his kind, and he hated them accordingly. He was therefore greatly exercised at the plot that he had heard discussed, which was aimed at the life of the great Tarmangani. He scratched his little grey head and the root of his tail and his belly as he attempted to mentally digest what he had heard and bring forth from the dim recesses of his little brain a plan to foil the priests and save Tarzan of the Apes. He made grotesque grimaces that were aimed at the unsuspecting Kadje and his followers, but which failed to perturb them, possibly because a huge granite block hid the little monkey from them. This was quite the most momentous thing that had occurred in the life of Manu. He wanted to jump up and down and dance and screech and jabber to scold and threaten the hated Oparians, but something told him that nothing would be gained by this, other than perhaps to launch in his direction a shower of granite missiles, which the priests knew only too well how to throw with accuracy. Now Manu is not a deep thinker, but upon this occasion he quite outdid himself, and managed to concentrate his mind upon the thing at hand rather than permit its being distracted by each falling leaf or buzzing insect. He even permitted a succulent caterpillar to crawl within his reach and out again with impunity. Just before darkness fell, Kadje saw a little grey monkey disappear over the summit of the outer wall 50 paces from where he crouched with his fellows, waiting for the coming of the fighting men. But so numerous were the monkeys about the ruins of Opar that the occurrence left Kadje's mind almost as quickly as the monkey disappeared from his view. And in the gathering gloom he did not see the little grey figure scampering off across the valley toward the band of intruders who now appeared to have stopped to rest at the foot of a large kopje that stood alone out in the valley, about a mile from the city. Little Manu was very much afraid out there alone in the growing dusk, and he scampered very fast with his tail bowed up and out behind him. All the time he cast affrighted glances to the right and left. The moment he reached the kopje, he scampered up its face as fast as he could. It was really a huge, precipitous granite rock with almost perpendicular sides, but sufficiently weather-worn to make its ascent easy to little Manu. He paused a moment at the summit to get his breath and still the beatings of his frightened little heart, and then he made his way around to a point where he could look down upon the party beneath. There, indeed, was the great Tarmangani Tarzan, and with him were some 50 Gomangani. The latter were splicing together a number of long, straight poles which they had laid upon the ground in 2 parallel lines. Across these two, at intervals of a foot or more, they were lashing smaller straight branches about 18 inches in length, the whole forming a crude but substantial ladder. The purpose of all this Manu, of course, did not understand, nor did he know that it had been evolved from the fertile brain of Flora Hooks as a means of scaling the precipitous kopje, at the summit of which lay the outer entrance to the treasure vaults of Opar. Nor did Manu know that the party had no intention of entering the city of Opar, and were therefore in no danger of becoming victims of Kadje's hidden assassins. To him, the danger to Tarzan of the Apes was very real, and so having regained his breath, he lost no time in delivering his warning to the friend of his people. Tarzan, he cried, in the language that was common to both. The white man and the blacks looked up at the sound of his chattering voice. "It is Manu," Tarzan continued, "the little monkey, who has come to tell you not to go to Opar. Kadje and his people await within the outer wall to slay you." The blacks, having discovered that the author of the disturbance was nothing but a little grey monkey, returned immediately to their work, while the white man similarly ignored his words of warning. Manu was not surprised at the lack of interest displayed by the blacks, for he knew that they did not understand his language, but he could not comprehend why Tarzan failed to pay any attention whatsoever to him. Again and again he called Tarzan by name. Again and again he shrieked his warning to the ape-man, but without eliciting any reply or any information that the great Tarmangani had either heard or understood him. Manu was mystified. What had occurred to render Tarzan of the Apes so indifferent to the warnings of his old friend? At last the little monkey gave it up and looked longingly back in the direction of the trees within the walled city of Opar. It was now very dark, and he trembled at the thought of recrossing the valley, where he knew enemies might prowl by night. He scratched his head and he hugged his knees, then sat there whimpering, a very forlorn and unhappy little ball of a monkey. But however uncomfortable he was upon the high kopje, he was comparatively safe, and so he decided to remain there during the night rather than venture the terrifying return trip through the darkness. Thus it was that he saw the ladder completed and erected against the side of the kopje, and when the moon rose at last and lighted the scene, he saw Tarzan of the apes urging his men to mount the ladder. He had never seen Tarzan thus rough and cruel with the blacks who accompanied him. Manu knew how ferocious the great Tarmangani could be with an enemy, whether man or beast, but he had never seen him accord such treatment to the blacks who were his friends. One by one, and with evident reluctance, the blacks ascended the ladder, continually urged forward to greater speed by the sharp spear of the white man. When they had all ascended, Tarzan followed, and Manu saw them disappear apparently into the heart of the great rock. It was only a short time later that they commenced to reappear, and now each was burdened by two heavy objects which appeared to Manu to be very similar to some of the smaller stone blocks that had been used in the construction of the buildings in Opar. He saw them take the blocks to the edge of the kopje and cast them over to the ground beneath, and when the last of the blacks had emerged with his load and cast it to the valley below, one by one the party descended the ladder to the foot of the kopje. But this time Tarzan of the apes went first. Then they lowered the ladder and took it apart and laid its pieces close to the foot of the cliff, after which they took up the blocks which they had brought from the heart of the kopje, and following Tarzan, who set out in the lead, they commenced to retrace their steps toward the rim of the valley. Manu would have been very much mystified had he been a man, but being only a monkey, he saw only what he saw without attempting to reason very much about it. He knew that the ways of men were peculiar and oftentimes unaccountable. For example, the Gomangani, who could not travel through the jungle and the forest with the ease of any other of the animals which frequented them, added to their difficulties by loading themselves down with additional weights in the form of metal anklets and armlets, with necklaces and girdles, and with skins of animals, which did nothing more than impede their progress and render life much more complicated than that which the untrammeled beasts enjoyed. Manu, whenever he gave the matter a thought, congratulated himself that he was not a man. He pitied the foolish, unreasonable creatures. Manu must have slept. He thought that he had only closed his eyes a moment, but when he opened them the rosy light of dawn had overspread the desolate valley. Just disappearing over the cliffs to the northeast, he could see the last of Tarzan's party commencing the descent of the barrier. Then Manu turned his face toward Opar and prepared to descend from the kopje and scamper back to the safety of his trees within the walls of Opar. But first he would reconnoiter Sheeta, the panther, might be still abroad, and so he scampered around the edge of the kopje to a point where he could see the entire valley floor between himself and Opar. And there it was that he saw again that which filled him with greatest excitement, for debouching from the ruined outer wall of Opar was a large company of Opar's frightful men, fully 100 of them Manu could have counted had Manu been able to count. They seemed to be coming toward the kopje, and he sat and watched them as they approached, deciding to defer his return to the city until after the path was cleared of hated Oparians. It occurred to him that they were coming after him, for the egotism of the lower animals is inordinate. Because he was a monkey, the idea did not seem at all ridiculous, and so he hid behind a jutting rock, with only one little, bright eye exposed to the enemy. He saw them come closer and he grew very much excited, though he was not at all afraid, for he knew that if they ascended one side of the kopje, he could descend the other and be halfway to Opar before they could possibly locate him again. On and on they came, but they did not stop at the kopje. As a matter of fact, they did not come very close to it, but continued on beyond it. Then it was that the truth of the matter flashed into the little brain of the monkey Kaje, and his people were pursuing Tarzan of the apes to slay him. If Manu had been offended by Tarzan's indifference to him upon the night before, he had evidently forgotten it, for now he was quite as excited about the danger which he saw menace the ape-man as he had been upon the afternoon previous. At first he thought of running ahead, and again warning Tarzan, but he feared to venture so far from the trees of Opar, even if the thought of having to pass the hated Oparians had not been sufficient to deter him from carrying out this plan. For a few minutes he sat watching them, until they had all passed the kopje, and then it became quite clear to him that they were heading directly for the spot at which the last of Tarzan's party had disappeared from the valley. There could be no doubt that they were in pursuit of the ape-man. Manu scanned the valley once more toward Opar. There was nothing in sight to deter him from an attempted return, and so, with the agility of his kind, he scampered down the vertical face of the kopje and was off at great speed toward the city's wall. Just when he formulated the plan that he eventually followed, it is difficult to say. Perhaps he thought it all out as he sat upon the kopje, watching Kajay and his people upon the trail of the ape-man, or perhaps it occurred to him while he was scampering across the barren waste toward Opar. It may just have popped into his mind from a clear sky after he had regained the leafy sanctuary of his own trees. Be that however as it may, the fact remains that as La, High Priestess and Princess of Opar, in company with several of her priestesses, was bathing in a pool in one of the temple gardens, she was startled by the screaming of a monkey. Swinging frantically by his tail from the branch of a great tree which overspread the pool, it was a little grey monkey with a face so wise and serious that one might easily have imagined that the fate of nations lay constantly upon the shoulders of its owner. La, it screamed, "They have gone to kill Tarzan. They have gone to kill Tarzan." At the sound of that name, La was instantly all attention. Standing waist deep in the pool, she looked up at the little monkey questioningly. "What do you mean, Manu?" she asked. "It has been many moons since Tarzan was at Opar. He is not here now. What are you talking about?" "I saw him," screamed Manu. "I saw him last night with many Gomangani. He came to the great rock that lies in the valley before Opar with all his men. He climbed to the top of it, went into the heart of it, and came out with stones which they threw down into the valley. Afterward they descended from the rock, and picked up the stones again and left the valley there," and Manu pointed toward the northeast with one of his hairy little fingers. "How do you know it was Tarzan of the Apes?" asked La. "Does Manu not know his cousin and his friend?" demanded the monkey. "With my eyes I saw him. It was Tarzan of the Apes." La of Opar puckered her brows in thought. Deep in her heart smoldered the fires of her great love for Tarzan, fires that had been quenched by the necessity that had compelled her marriage with Kajay since last she had seen the ape-man. For it is written among the laws of Opar that the high priestess of the flaming god must take a mate within a certain number of years after her consecration. For many moons had La longed to make Tarzan that mate. The ape-man had not loved her, and finally she had come to a realization that he could never love her. Afterward she had bowed to the frightful fate that had placed her in the arms of Kajay. As month after month had passed and Tarzan had not returned to Opar, as he had promised he would do, to see that no harm befell La, she had come to accept the opinion of Kajay that the ape-man was dead, and though she hated the repulsive Kajay none the less. Her love for Tarzan had gradually become little more than a sorrowful memory. Now to learn that he was alive and had been so near was like reopening an old wound. At first she comprehended little else than that Tarzan had been close to Opar, but presently the cries of Manu aroused her to a realization that the ape-man was in danger. Just what the danger was she did not know. "Who has gone to kill Tarzan of the Apes?" she demanded suddenly. "Kajay," shrieked Manu. "He has gone with many, many men, and is following upon the spoor of Tarzan." La sprang quickly from the pool, seized her girdle and ornaments from her attendant, and adjusting them hurriedly, sped through the garden and into the temple.